Captain Elias Thorne gripped the shuttle's controls as the hull shuddered, alarms blaring red across the cockpit. He wrenched them hard, fighting the buck of the vessel as a jagged hunk of debris smashed against the flank, sending vibrations rattling through his bones. "Hold her steady," he barked, his fingers dancing over the console in a frantic blur, rerouting power from life support to the thrusters with desperate precision. The air in the cockpit grew slightly thinner, but there was no time for complaints. Below them, the alien planet's surface churned with storm clouds, lightning forking like veins through the dark, brooding mass. The tempest seemed alive, hungry, as if Epsilon 9 itself rejected their intrusion. Lieutenant Kira Voss braced against the co-pilot's seat, her eyes locked on the sensor readouts, unblinking amid the chaos. "Incoming debris field, it's the remnants of their fleet. We punch through or we splatter." Her voice was calm, edged with that unflinching resolve that had kept their squad alive through a dozen skirmishes on the border worlds, where every decision was a razor's edge between survival and oblivion. The shuttle bucked violently as a chunk of twisted metal grazed the wing, sparks erupting from a panel in a shower of incandescent fury. The acrid smell of burning circuits filled the confined space, stinging their eyes. Thorne yanked the stick, veering hard left into the storm's fury, where the wind howled like a banshee against the reinforced viewport. "Nav, give me options. We can't land blind in this soup." Ensign Raj Patel, hunched over his station in the back, wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his gloved hand. His fingers flew across the holographic display, plotting trajectories amid the swirling chaos of data streams and warning icons. "Surface contact in 30 seconds. There's a clearing, old impact site, maybe one of theirs. But it's hot. Residual radiation from the warheads lingers like a curse." Thorne nodded grimly, his mind already calculating the risks. Better than nothing. "Kira, arm the countermeasures. Raj, hail the away team on the ground. Tell them we're coming in hot." The storm raged fiercer now, the wind howling against the viewport with a ferocity that made the frame creak. Kira's fingers hovered over the launch sequence, her movements precise despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. Why'd they even invite us here? Peace talks on a graveyard world? She didn't wait for an answer, her focus sharpening like a blade as the first wave of debris loomed large on the sensors, a deadly hail closing in. Thorne's jaw tightened, his thoughts flashing to the fragile hope of this mission. The United Earth Alliance had brokered this summit after years of brutal border clashes with the Zyfari Collective, those enigmatic, tentacled beings whose ships moved like shadows through the void, silent and inscrutable. First contact had been a disaster. Misunderstandings escalating from tense standoffs to full-scale war, fleets clashing in the cold dark between stars. Now, with both sides bloodied and resources stretched thin, the aliens had proposed neutral ground on Epsilon 9, a forsaken rock scarred by ancient battles long predating humanity's arrival. Common ground, they called it, a place where old wounds might heal. Thorne wasn't buying the optimism. His years on the frontier had taught him that trust was a luxury rarely afforded. A proximity alert screamed through the cockpit, shrill and insistent. Thorne rolled the shuttle into a barrel turn, the G-forces pressing them into their seats as he dodged a spinning girder the size of a tank, its edges glinting menacingly in the storm's flashes. "Raj, status on the team?" Thorne demanded, his voice cutting through the din. "Captain Hale's squad reports visual on the beacon. They're pinned down, hostiles in the ruins. Not Safari. Something else." Patel's voice cracked slightly, the first hint of fear breaking through his usual steadiness. A young ensign thrust into the fire of real command. Thorne's gut twisted like a knife. "Something else?" "Elaborate. Scans show human signatures, but they're not ours. Wait, bio readings off the charts. Augmented, maybe scavengers or worse?" The words hung heavy, painting a picture of rogue elements lurking in the shadows of the war. The shuttle broke through the debris cloud at last, engines whining in protest as the surface rushed up to meet them. Jagged craters pockmarked the gray landscape, remnants of orbital bombardments from a conflict older than humanity's spacefaring days. Silent witnesses to forgotten atrocities. In the distance, the Peace Summit dome squatted like a metallic blister against the tempest, its lights flickering erratically. A beacon of desperation. Kira leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Dome's under attack. Multiple bogies closing fast." Thorne flipped the comms open with a flick of his thumb. "All hands, this is Thorne. We're dropping in 5. Prepare for immediate evac." He didn't mention the doubt gnawing at him. The Zyfari delegation was inside that dome, along with Ambassador Hale and her entourage. If this was a trap, it was the sloppiest one he'd ever seen, riddled with too many variables to be deliberate. The landing struts deployed with a hydraulic hiss, the shuttle slamming into the soft, ash-choked soil with a jolt that jarred their teeth. Dust billowed around them in choking clouds as Thorn killed the engines, the sudden silence almost as disorienting as the roar. He unstrapped quickly, grabbing his pulse rifle from the rack with practiced ease. "Kira, you're with me. Raj, monitor from here. Keep the bird warm and ready for dust-off." She nodded, slinging her own weapon over her shoulder, her cautious nature yielding to the surge of adrenaline that sharpened every sense. "After you, Captain Braveheart," she quipped, a flicker of her usual wit breaking through the tension. They burst out the hatch into the howling wind, boots sinking into the regolith with each step, the fine dust clinging like a second skin. Gunfire echoed from the dome, sharp cracks mingling with the deeper thrum of energy weapons discharging in the ruins. Thorn scanned the horizon through his visor. Silhouettes darted between the shattered structures, too blocky to be the fluid grace of Zephyri, too erratic for disciplined Alliance Marines. A burst of plasma scorched the ground near Thorn's feet, the heat blooming through his boots. He dove behind a shattered pillar, pulling Kira down with him in a tangle of limbs and gear. "Contact! 12 o'clock. She peeked out cautiously, returning fire in controlled bursts that lit the dust with muzzle flashes. "They're human, all right. But look at the gear. Salvaged Zephyri tech mixed with ours. Pirates? Or worse. Raiders who've been waiting for this moment, smelling blood in the water." Thorn keyed his helmet comm, the connection crackling amid the interference. "Hale, report." "What's your sitrep?" Static crackled for agonizing seconds. Then Hale's voice came through, strained but steady, laced with the grit of a veteran. "Captain, it's an ambush. Not the Zephyri, these are Void Reapers. They hit us the moment we landed. Ambassadors secure, but the alien reps? They're gone. Vaporized in the initial blast." Thorn's blood ran cold, a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. Common ground indeed. The Reapers, human outcasts, augmented fanatics who despised both sides of the war, viewing the conflict as a corruption of pure human destiny, had turned the summit into a slaughterhouse, igniting the very flames they claimed to abhor. He sighted down his rifle, the reticule steady in his HUD, and dropped one assailant with a precise headshot, the body crumpling into the dust. "Hold position. We're coming to you." As they advanced through the ruins, the wind carried a new sound, the guttural roar of engines overhead. Zephyri scout ships, sleek and iridescent, streaked into the fray, their weapons painting the sky with coherent light beams that sliced through the gloom. Friend or foe? Thorn had no time to guess. Survival narrowed his world to the next step, the next breath. He just ran, Kira at his side, toward the dome where the fragile hope of peace lay bleeding out amid the ash and thunder. Kira's boots pounded the cracked regolith, each step kicking up plumes of dust that clung to her visor like gray ghosts, obscuring her view in fleeting veils. Thorn kept pace beside her, his rifle slung low and ready, scanning the jagged horizon where the dome's silhouette loomed, a fragile bubble of alloy and hope amid the asteroid's barren waste, its lights pulsing like a faltering heartbeat. The roar of those Zephyri ships grew louder, slicing through the thin atmosphere like knives through silk, their iridescent hulls flashing against the starfield in hypnotic patterns. "Thorn, those scouts, they're locking on," Kira hissed into her comm, her voice steady but edged with the caution that had kept her alive through a dozen border skirmishes, where hesitation meant a plasma bolt to the chest. She was the planner, always mapping 3 exits before entering a room, and now her mind raced through contingencies. Evade left into the craters for cover, or push straight ahead and risk exposure. The storm's fury whipped at their suits, the wind a constant assault that tugged at their forms. He didn't break stride, his focus unyielding. Not yet. Dome's our rally point. Ambassador's signal is holding steady. Brave to a fault, Thorn trusted gut over grid, the kind of grit that had earned him command of this diplomatic escort squad, pulling them from the jaws of defeat time and again. But even he felt the weight of it pressing down. The summit meant to bridge human expansion with Zephyri territory disputes, now a graveyard for the alien delegates, their tentacled forms reduced to ash in the Reaper's opening salvo. A laser lanced down from the lead ship, carving a smoking furrow 20 meters ahead, the ground trembling as shards of rock ejected like shrapnel, pinging off their armor with sharp, insistent impacts. The heat wave washed over them, a brief inferno in the cold. Kira dove right, yanking Thorn with her into a shallow trench carved by ancient impacts, the walls rough and unyielding under their gloved hands. That was a warning shot. They're not ours. Not yet, anyway. Peering up through the dust, Thorn spotted the Reaper dropship wreckage smoldering nearby, its hull twisted like a gutted fish, still leaking acrid smoke into the gale. The fanatics had hit first, vaporizing the Zephyri reps in a bid to reignite the war on a pyre of betrayal. But these scouts were responding, ally or avenger, it didn't matter in the heat of the moment. Their fire was clearing a path, however unintended. The trench walls pressed close, etched with micrometeor scars that caught the faint light from the system's distant sun, casting eerie patterns on their visors. Flankers incoming, Kira reported, her scanner beeping softly in her earpiece, a warning chime that set her teeth on edge. 2 Reaper-augmented troops, hulking figures in patchwork exosuits, eyes glowing with illicit neural implants that promised enhanced reflexes at the cost of sanity, crested the ridge behind them, their forms silhouetted against the stormy sky. One fired a plasma bolt that superheated the air, turning a nearby boulder to molten slag with a hiss that echoed like a dying scream. Thorn rolled to his knees, sighting through the swirling dust, his breath steady despite the pounding in his chest. His shot caught the first in the joint of its leg servo, dropping it with a mechanical whine that cut through the wind, Kira suppressing fire. "We push on my mark." His command was crisp, born of battles where split seconds decided fates. She nodded, her witty edge surfacing even now amid the peril. "Mark? Or should I say after you, fearless leader?" Burst from her carbine stitched the air in precise patterns, forcing the second Reaper to duck behind cover, buying them precious moments. They were outmatched in open ground, the Reaper's augmentations turning them into relentless machines. But the trench funneled the fight, narrowing the angles and buying seconds they desperately needed. The Zephyri ships circled tighter overhead, their coherent light beams now targeting the Reapers with surgical precision, each strike a bloom of fire and shrapnel. One assailant exploded in a spectacular bloom of fire, the shockwave sending debris raining down like lethal confetti. Thorn seized the moment, his muscles coiling. Now! They vaulted from cover, sprinting the last 100 meters to the dome's airlock, hearts hammering in unison. Alarms wailed inside the structure, red strobes pulsing through the translucent panels like arterial blood. But as they slammed the override code into the panel, a deeper rumble shook the asteroid, vibrating up through their boots. The dome's foundation groaned in protest, cracks spiderwebbing across the base like fragile ice under pressure. The resource shortage hit them like a slap. The Reaper's initial blast must have compromised the structure, venting atmosphere and destabilizing the whole outpost, turning their sanctuary into a ticking bomb. Kira sealed the inner hatch with a decisive hiss, her breath fogging the inside of her visor in rapid bursts. "Ambassadors in the core chamber. But this place is fracturing. We get him out or we all become common dust." Thorn stripped his helmet off with a click, revealing sweat-streaked features hardened by years of frontier service, lines etched deep from sleepless nights and hard choices. Then we improvise. Always do. Outside, the Zephyri ships hovered protectively, their engines thrumming. A tentative truce forged in the chaos of survival, lights cutting through the dust like promises. Kira gripped the bulkhead as another tremor rippled through the outpost, the floor tilting like a ship caught in a swell, sending loose tools skittering across the deck. Dust sifted from the ceiling vents in a fine gray haze, coating her suit and turning everything to a monochrome blur. She punched the corridor map on her wrist display, tracing the path to the core chamber. 200 meters straight ahead, past the engineering bays, if the schematics held true amid the damage. "Thorn, you take point," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline spiking her pulse like electric fire. "Reapers might have left traps. Ambassador's protocol drone said he's stable, but unstable means dead if we dawdle." Thorn nodded, snapping his helmet back on with a hiss of seals engaging, the familiar weight grounding him. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the dim-lit hall ahead, shadows playing tricks in the erratic lighting. Years on the fringe worlds had etched those lines into his face, but they only sharpened his focus, turning doubt into determination. He hefted the multi-tool from his belt, its blade extending with a low whine that echoed softly. "Copy, Raj, cover R6. Keep that scanner hot. Any energy spikes? You yell before they bite." Raj, the youngest of the team, adjusted his pack straps with careful hands, his cautious nature showing in the way he double-checked his rifle's charge indicator, fingers lingering on the grip. Fresh from academy rotations, he lacked Thorn's scars but made up for it with meticulous prep. Every action measured against potential failure. Scans clean so far, but Atmos dropping fast. 15 minutes tops before we suit up or suffocate in here. They moved out, boots clanging against the grated deck in a rhythmic cadence that masked their tension. The corridor stretched like a vein in the asteroid's hollowed heart. Emergency lights flickering in erratic bursts that plunged sections into momentary darkness. Kira fell in behind Thorn, her mind racing through contingencies like a tactical overlay. The Zephyri delegation had arrived under flags of parley, their sleek ships docking amid the Reaper's first strikes, a convergence of fate. Now, with the dome cracking and resources bleeding out into the void, that parley felt like a distant dream, shattered by violence. Common ground, the ambassador had called it in her briefings. More like a shared pit, a trap disguised as hope. A sharp crack echoed from the walls, metal protesting, and Raj cursed under his breath, the sound swallowed by the rumble, structural integrity at 40%. That blast wave hit harder than intel suggested, it's shearing the supports. Save the math, Thorn grunted, slicing through a jammed hatch with the multi-tool, the blade chewing through twisted metal in a shower of sparks that illuminated the corridor like fleeting stars. We adapt or we die. Ambassador first. Diplomacy's our ticket off this rock and back to the fleet. The inner door groaned open on protesting hinges, revealing a junction laced with exposed conduits, snaking like exposed nerves. Steam hissed from a ruptured line, hot and scalding, and Kira swerved to avoid it, her suit's sensors beeping a shrill warning of thermal hazard. They pressed on, the rumble growing insistent, like the asteroid itself protesting the intrusion of outsiders into its ancient wounds. In the core chamber, the ambassador waited, or so the drone had promised, its last transmission a garbled assurance amid the static. Kira overrode the final lock, the panel sparking under her gloved fingers as circuits fried in protest. The door slid aside with a reluctant scrape, grinding against debris. Inside, the chamber hummed with failing machinery, the air thick with the scent of overheating electronics. Hollow displays flickered erratically, projecting fractured star maps of the system, sectors blinking in and out like dying stars. Ambassador Hale stood at the central console, his diplomatic robes disheveled and torn. A Zephyri liaison slumped beside him, its iridescent skin paling under the red emergency glow. Multifaceted eyes dim but alert. Hale turned, relief etching deep lines into his features, a momentary crack in his composed facade. You made it. The truce holds outside, but this place... Save it, Thorn interrupted, his rifle sweeping the room in a slow arc, HUD scanning for threats. Evac pod prepped? Hale shook his head, frustration evident. Power surge fried the launch sequence. We're grounded until we can reroute. The floor buckled then, a deep groan splitting the air like tearing fabric. Chunks of ceiling rained down in a cascade, one slamming into Raj's shoulder with bone-jarring force. He staggered back, rifle clattering to the deck as pain flared white-hot. Incoming breach, Raj gasped, clutching his arm. Kira lunged forward, hauling Raj upright as more debris cascaded around them, the air filling with dust and the sharp tang of ruptured seals. The Zephyri stirred beside Hale, its multifaceted eyes focusing on them with alien intensity, limbs twitching as it assessed the peril. Humans, your ingenuity. The ship's weight, but the rock falls. It rasped through the translator, its voice a harmonic overlay of clicks and tones. Thorn barked orders, shoving Hale toward the side access panel with unyielding force. Raj, seal that breach, weld it if you have to. Kira, rig the console for manual override. We hotwire this pod or improvise a sled if it comes to that. She dove under the console without hesitation, tools flying from her pack in a blur of motion, wires tangled like vines in the underbelly. A chaotic nest of circuits, but her hands moved with frontier precision. Splice here, bypass there. Fingers steady amid the sparks that danced across her visor like fireflies. The tremor intensified, the chamber tilting at a perilous angle, gravity shifting as supports gave way. Raj welded a panel over the widening crack with grim determination, his breaths coming in ragged bursts, sweat mixing with the grime on his face.
Holding, barely. Atmo venting, suits mandatory now.
Or we choke on our own dust. The Zephyri rose unsteadily to its full height, extending a limb toward Thorn in a gesture that might have been alliance or plea. Our vessels can extract, but the Reapers circle like shadows. Trust must bridge this chaos. Thorn met its gaze, jaw set in determination, the alien's eyes like prisms reflecting his resolve. Trust's earned in the breach, not words. Help Kira or stay put and guard Hale. It complied without protest, its appendages deftly threading a power conduit where human fingers couldn't reach, manipulating the delicate filaments with eerie grace. The console beeped to life under their combined efforts, lights stabilizing in a fragile glow. Kira yanked the final connection free with a triumphant tug. Pods live. Strap in, 30 seconds to the launch window, or we miss it entirely. They piled into the cramped evac pod, bodies pressing close in the confined space, Hale clutching the Zephyri's arm for balance as the alien steadied him. The hatch sealed with a resounding thud, and the pod lurched free, rocketing through the fracturing dome with acceleration that pinned them to their seats. Outside, the asteroid's surface blurred past in a haze, jagged craters and the hovering Zephyri fleet, their engines a beacon in the endless void, lights cutting through the storm like threads of hope. But as the pod cleared the debris field, alarms blared anew, harsh and unrelenting. Raj checked the readouts on the cramped panel, his face illuminated in red. Reaper signatures closing fast. They punched through the truce net, drones inbound. Kira gripped the harness tightly, staring at the stars streaking by in elongated trails. Improvise, Thorn had said, his mantra in the face of doom. But with Graves calling from below, survival demanded more than grit. It required alliance, a bridge across the chasm of species and suspicion. The pod shuddered under the strain, engines straining against the pursuit like a cornered animal. Thorn's voice cut through the din, steady as ever. Hold course. We're not dust yet, not while breath remains. The pod's hull groaned under the relentless strain, vibrations rattling through the seats like a beast shaking off sleep, every creak a reminder of their fragility. Thorn leaned forward against his harness, eyes locked on the flickering console where Raj's fingers danced across the controls in a desperate bid to maintain stability. Divert power to the aft thrusters. Give us a burst to shake these bastards off our tail, Thorn ordered, his tone brooking no argument. Raj nodded, sweat beading on his brow and trickling down his temple, his cautious precision now a whirlwind of necessity. On it, but we're bleeding fuel fast. One good hit and we're vapor, scattered atoms in the black. Kira twisted in her harness, glancing back at Hale, who still gripped the Zephyri's scaled arm. Zorath, the diplomat they'd pulled from the crumbling outpost, his iridescent form a stark contrast to the human clutter. Zorath's multifaceted eyes widened, mandibles clicking in what Hale hoped was alarm rather than the onset of panic, the translator struggling to convey the nuance. The Reapers, they sense weakness like predators in the deep. Our true signal failed, jammed or ignored. What now? Zorath's voice carried a harmonic undertone, layers of meaning woven into the synthetic speech. Improvise, Thorn muttered, echoing his own earlier words, the mantra a shield against despair. He unstrapped partially, bracing against the bulkhead as the pod veered sharply to evade an incoming lance, the motion sending his stomach lurching. Outside the viewport, the void twisted into a smeared canvas, stars stretching into lines while dark shapes, Reaper drones, sleek and predatory with angular hulls like scythes, closed the gap inexorably. Their energy lances had already scored the pod's shields, leaving glowing scars that faded slowly, the barriers weakening with each hit. Hale released Zorath's arm at last, her hand lingering a second too long in a gesture of unspoken solidarity before she reached for the emergency kit wedged under her seat. Brave but cautious, that's what Thorn had pegged her for back on the asteroid, always the one patching wounds while others charged ahead, her diplomacy extending to the battlefield. We can't outrun them forever. Raj, any debris fields ahead? Something to hide in, lose their sensors? Hale's voice was measured, her mind already plotting vectors. Raj's voice cracked over the hum of failing systems, the strain evident. Scans show a cluster. Old mining wreckage from the 89 incursion. Twisted hulks drifting in lazy orbits. If we thread it tight, maybe we lose them. But it's a gamble. One wrong turn and we're the ones smashed to scrap. The pod bucked as a Reaper lance grazed the flank, the impact sending sparks erupting into the cabin like fireworks gone wrong. Alarms wailed in cacophony. Red lights pulsing in rhythm with Thorn's heartbeat. Kira cursed under her breath, her witty edge dulled by the fear-etching lines around her eyes. She'd been the negotiator in quieter times, the one bridging human grit with Safari protocol through endless talks. But now words felt useless against the closing jaws of death, reduced to primal shouts. Thorn slammed a fist on the console, the impact jarring his arm but steadying his resolve. Do it. Plot the path, tight as you can. He turned to Zorath, forcing calm into his tone despite the chaos. Your people have tech we don't. Any tricks from your fleet protocols? A frequency jammer? Anything to throw them off? Zorath hesitated, bioluminescent veins pulsing along his neck in rhythmic waves, a sign of internal debate. Then with a decisive click of his mandibles, he extended a limb toward a side panel, interfacing directly with the pod's auxiliary systems through a port that hummed to life under his touch. Reapers hunt by resonance, echoing through the ether. I can modulate our emissions, make us echo like debris, inert and unthreatening. But it requires trust. Your systems are crude, blunt tools in a subtle war. Crude works when finesse fails, Thorn said, a grim smile cracking his lips for the first time, a spark of camaraderie in the dark. Hit it now. As Raj punched the coordinates into the nav, the pod dove toward the wreckage field, a graveyard of twisted metal hulks drifting in silent orbit, relics of a long-forgotten mining disaster. Shards of asteroid rock peppered the view, glinting like forgotten teeth in the starlight, a minefield waiting to claim them. The first Reaper overshot their position, its scan pinging harmlessly off a larger fragment, veering away in confusion. But the second adjusted mid-flight, lancing fire that clipped the pod's wing with a screech of tearing metal. The cabin decompressed, in a sudden hiss, seals holding just barely, the air whistling out in thin streams. Hale was on it in seconds, slapping a patch over the breach with hands steady despite the chaos swirling around her, the material adhering with a chemical sizzle. Pressure dropping. Kira, seal's not enough. Reroute air from the forward tanks. Equalize it? Kira complied, her fingers fumbling but sure amid the jolts. Rerouting flows while Zorath's modulation kicked in fully. The pod's signature blurred on the readouts, mimicking the inert hulks around them. A ghost among the dead. The pursuing drones circled closer, sensors sweeping in wide arcs. But they hesitated, as if sniffing at phantoms in the void. Their algorithms grappling with the deception. Thorn watched the scopes intently, breath held in his chest, the tension coiling like a spring. Come on, buy us time. Just a little more, he murmured, willing the ruse to hold. One Reaper veered away sharply, drawn to a false echo farther, out in the field, its engines flaring as it pursued shadows. But the lead drone lingered, hovering like a shadow over prey, its form a menacing silhouette against the debris. Then, with a burst of acceleration that lit the void, it fired blindly into the field, beams slicing through debris in lethal sweeps, one fragment exploding in a spray of shrapnel that peppered the pod's hull like hail on tin. "We've got incoming!" Raj yelled, his voice rising in pitch as the impacts rattled them. The pod spun out of control for a heartbeat, controls fighting back as Thorn grabbed the manual yoke with both hands, muscles straining. "Hard left, now!" He wrenched it savagely, the pod careening through a narrow gap between two massive derelicts, the walls of wreckage rushing past in a blur. The Reaper followed too close, its form filling the viewport like a nightmare made manifest. Sensors locked and unyielding. Zorath's eyes flared with inner light, facets shifting. The resonance is holding, but not against proximity scans. We must draw it into the densest cluster, force it to collide, turn its aggression against itself. Thorn met Hale's gaze across the cramped space, her eyes reflecting the same grim calculation. Her nod was all he needed. A silent pact in the storm. "You heard him. Raj, tighten the weave, thread the needle. Kira, keep those shields up, cycle them if you have to." The pod twisted through the maze of wreckage, engines whining in protest at the demands, the hull groaning with each evasive turn. Debris clanged off the exterior, each impact a jolt that tested their harnesses and resolve, the confined space amplifying every shudder. The Reaper gained ground relentlessly, its pursuit a mechanical inevitability, until Zorath amped the signal. AI desperate pulse that mimicked a larger ship's core signature, a lure too tempting to ignore. The drone dove in pursuit, straight into the heart of a collapsed mining rig, its bulk ensnared in the tangled remains. A chain reaction bloomed in spectacular fashion. The Reaper's lance ignited volatile fuel residues lingering in the hulks, and the rig erupted in a fireball that swallowed the drone whole, the explosion's fury lighting the void like a newborn sun. Secondary blasts rippled outward, buffeting the pod like a leaf in a gale, tossing it through eddies of debris. They cleared the field at last, battered but intact, the remaining Reapers scattering into the black, their formation broken. Silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the settling creak of the hull and their collective exhales of relief. Thorn slumped back in his seat, the adrenaline ebbing into exhaustion. That was too close. Zorath, you just saved our hides. Bought us a fighting chance. The Zephyri inclined his head slightly, mandibles softening in what passed for a smile among his kind. Alliance human, not just words and treaties, but deeds in the dark. But as the pod limped toward the faint signal of the Zephyri fleet, a new alert pinged insistently. Structural integrity at 42%, the hull's wounds accumulating like unpaid debts. They weren't out of the fire yet. The cost of survival etched deeper with every strained breath, every flicker of the lights. Thorn gripped the console edge as the pod shuddered onward, its thrusters firing in erratic bursts against the endless void, each pulse a gamble against failure. The alert chime drilled into his skull like a persistent insect, a relentless reminder that 42% integrity meant they were flying on borrowed time. One stray micrometeorite could turn their fragile craft into drifting debris, lost to the stars. He glanced at Zorath, the Zephyri's multifaceted eyes reflecting the flickering readouts in prismatic shards. His chitinous frame braced against the harness with unyielding poise. Structural scans show microfractures along the aft hull, Zorath said, his voice a low rasp through the translator, laced with the harmonic undertones of his native speech. We must divert power to shields immediately. Fleet is 3 light minutes out but closing on an intercept vector. Thorn nodded curtly, his fingers already dancing over the controls, rerouting auxiliary energy from non-essentials. The pod lurched as life support dimmed to a murmur, fans slowing to a whisper. The air grew thicker, laced with the acrid tang of overheating circuits and the faint metallic bite of recycled oxygen. Do it, and keep eyes on those Reapers. If they regroup, we're done before we even dock. Thorn's command was sharp, his mind already leaping to the next threat. Zorath's mandibles clicked in affirmation, a sound like distant castanets as he extended a secondary limb to interface directly with the nav system. The alien's touch was precise, almost gentle, weaving through the human code like threads in a loom, adapting protocols on the fly. Thorn watched from the corner of his eye, a grudging respect building. These Zephyri weren't the fragile diplomats the briefings painted as aloof scholars. They adapted, just like anyone fighting to breathe in the black expanse of space, their resilience a mirror to humanity's own stubborn fire. A proximity warning blared suddenly. Not Reapers, but something worse. A debris field from the rig's explosion, tumbling toward them like a swarm of invisible knives, shards spinning in lethal trajectories. Thorn yanked the yoke hard, evading, a chunk of twisted metal that scraped the pod's flank with a screech that vibrated through his bones, the sound lingering like a scar. Sparks erupted from a nearby panel, acrid smoke curling, and the integrity readout dropped to 38% in a blink, the numbers a cold verdict. Brace! Thorn shouted as the pod spun into a wild barrel roll, centrifugal force pressing them sideways. Zorath's grip tightened on the harness, his exoskeleton humming with internal stabilizers that kept him steady where humans might falter. They cleared the worst of the swarm, but the spin left Thorn's stomach churning, vision blurring at the edges from the G-forces. Zorath released a subtle pheromone burst into the cabin. Thorn caught the faint, earthy scent, meant to calm nerves in Zephyri packs, but it only sharpened his focus, cutting through the disorientation like a clarion call. Human resilience, the Zephyri murmured, admiration threading his words. Your vessel fights like you, unyielding even when wounded. Thorn snorted, steadying the controls with a firm hand, the pod responding sluggishly. She's a scout pod, not a warship built for brawls. But yeah, she'll hold together. He didn't mention the growing ache in his ribs from the earlier blasts. Pain was just fuel now, pushing him forward when exhaustion whispered retreat. The fleet's silhouette emerged on the scopes at last. A wedge of angular Zifari cruisers arrayed in defensive formation, their hulls iridescent under the distant starlight. A majestic sight that stirred hope. But as they closed the distance, a new signal cut through the comms. A distress beacon from one of the lead ships, erratic and fading like a voice on the wind. Zorath's eyes widened, facets shifting like shattered glass catching light. "My kin," he said, voice tightening with urgency, mandibles clenching. Boarding action underway. Reapers have infiltrated the vessel. Tendrils in the vents, shadows in the halls. Thorn's jaw set like iron, resolve hardening. No time for standard docking protocols, they were too exposed. He punched in an intercept course manually, the pod groaning under the sudden strain of acceleration. "We're going in hot. You lead the way. I'll cover your advance." Zorath unstrapped with fluid motion, retrieving a sleek energy lance from the bulkhead mount, its hilt humming to life in his grasp. Alliance holds true. We reclaim what is ours or fall together. The pod latched onto the cruiser's airlock with a metallic clang that reverberated through the frame, seals hissing as pressure equalized in a rush of recycled air. Thorn followed Zorath into the corridor beyond, the air thick with smoke and the ozone sting of plasma fire, a battlefield scent that set his instincts alight. Alarms wailed in overlapping tongues, Zifari chittering orders mingling with human standard klaxons from the integrated alliance systems, a cacophony of desperation. They rounded a bulkhead into chaos, 3 Reapers, hulking, biomechanical horrors with scything limbs like industrial shears, tore through a cluster of Zifari defenders, their forms a grotesque fusion of stolen tech and organic nightmare. One defender fell with a wet crunch, mandibles shattered, green ichor spraying the walls in arterial arcs. Zorath charged without hesitation, his lance igniting in a blue arc that severed a Reaper's arm at the joint, the limb twitching on the deck like a severed snake. Thorn grabbed a discarded pulse rifle from the floor, its weight familiar and reassuring in his hands, the grip worn from use. He fired in controlled bursts, bolts slamming into a Reaper's chassis with thunderous impacts, cracking its armored shell and exposing glowing innards. The thing whirled toward him, red sensors locking on with malevolent focus. But Zorath was there in an instant, tackling it with a chitinous crash that echoed down the hall, the two forms tumbling in a tangle of limbs and fury. "Flank it!" Zorath grunted through clenched mandibles, pinning the beast as it thrashed wildly, barbs scraping sparks from the walls. Thorn slid low across the deck, jamming the rifle's muzzle into a glowing joint and unleashing a full clip in a deafening roar. Sparks flew in a fountain, servos whining as the Reaper's limb went limp, power surging erratically. It reared back in defiance, impaling Zorath's shoulder with a vicious spike. The Zifari roared, a sound like grinding stones under pressure but held firm, driving his lance through its core with vengeful force. The Reaper slumped to the deck, but not before its death throes raked Zorath's side, carving shallow gashes that wept viscous fluid, staining the floor. Thorn finished the third with a precise headshot, the bolt punching through its sensor cluster in a burst of sparks. The corridor fell into ragged quiet, broken only by distant blasts echoing like thunder, the ship's wounds deepening. Zorath slumped against the wall, his lance dimming as energy reserves flagged, the blue glow fading. The bridge. We must secure it before they corrupt the core. Thorn helped him up, slinging the alien's arm over his shoulder, the weight surprising in its solidity, unyielding chitin over muscle. "On your 6. Let's end this boarding party. Clear the path." They pressed on, footsteps echoing in the blood-slicked halls, the fleet's fate hanging on their next turn, every shadow a potential threat. Integrity be damned. Survival demanded they push deeper into the heart of the storm. Thorn's boot slipped on the congealing ichor pooling on the deck, but he caught himself against the bulkhead, Zorath's weight dragging him forward like an anchor in a storm, steadying rather than hindering. The aliens' breaths came in wet rasps, each one syncing with the pulse of emergency lights flickering overhead, casting their forms in staccato red. Distant explosions rattled the deck plating, a reminder that the void outside was no kinder than the corridors within, where every corner hid peril. "Reapers ahead," Zorath muttered, his voice a gravelly hiss through the translator implant, pain threading the words. He nodded toward the junction ahead, where shadows twisted unnaturally in the red glow, unnatural movements betraying ambush. 3, maybe 4. They converge on the bridge like vermin to a wound, drawn by the ship's vital signs. Zorath's warning carried the weight of experience, his kind's senses attuned to the subtle vibrations of intrusion. Thorn unslung his rifle, the stock cool and reassuring against his palm, a familiar companion in the unknown. He'd seen enough of these things in fragmented reports. Nightmare hybrids of chitin and stolen tech, born from some long-forgotten experiment gone feral, their forms evolving in real time to counter threats. No time for awe or questions. Action was the only currency here. We flank left. You draw them out. I'll pick them off from the shadows. Cover me when I move. Thorn's plan was terse, honed by battles where verbosity killed. Zorath's mandibles clicked in what Thorn had learned was agreement, though pain etched fresh lines across his exoskeletal face, facets dimming slightly. He hefted the lance, its energy core humming faintly like a caged storm, and peeled away from the wall with deliberate slowness. They moved as one, years of joint ops, though brief, forging instincts sharper than any blade, a rhythm born of necessity. The first Reaper lunged from the shadows, its segmented limbs scything through the air with lethal intent. Barbs extended, Zorath met it head-on, lance thrusting forward to impale the creature's underbelly in a spray of black fluid that sizzled against the metal floor, corrosive and foul. But the beast didn't fall clean. It twisted mid-strike, barbs raking Zorath's already torn side, drawing a fresh seep of ichor. He staggered back, a low keen escaping his throat, pain lancing through his form. Thorn fired twice in rapid succession, rounds punching through the Reaper's flank with meaty impacts, the creature convulsing and dropping in a heap. But the noise drew the others like moths to flame. 2 more erupted from vents above, dropping with predatory grace, their forms coiling for the pounce. The third skittered along the ceiling, mandibles clacking in anticipation, a spider in the rafters. "Down!" Thorn barked, shoving Zorath aside as a barb whipped past his helmet, close enough to score the plasteel. He rolled across the deck, coming up firing in a fluid motion. 1 Reaper shattered under the barrage, shards of carapace embedding in the wall like shrapnel from a grenade. The second charged him, faster than its bulk suggested, forcing Thorn to dodge into a side panel that buckled under his shoulder with a crunch, pain blooming. Zorath recovered with warrior's grit, driving his lance into the charger's leg joint. It buckled with a mechanical screech, but not before the creature's tail lashed out, catching the alien across the chest in a glancing blow that sent him hitting the deck hard, lance skittering away across the grate. The third Reaper dropped then, landing between them with a thud, its multifaceted eyes locking on the fallen Zifari, mandibles parting in hunger. Thorn's heart hammered against his ribs, ammo counter blinking low. 8 rounds left, a dwindling lifeline. He couldn't let it reach Zorath. The alien was too wounded to fend it off alone. Improvising on instinct, he grabbed a loose conduit from the wall, the exposed wires sparking wildly with residual power, a makeshift weapon born of desperation. "Hey, ugly. Over here," Thorn taunted, voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. The Reaper pivoted toward him, sensing easier prey in the taunt, its sensors flaring. Thorn swung the conduit like a bat, jamming it into the creature's maw with all his force. Electricity arced in blue fire, dancing across its form in chaotic bursts, the stench of frying organics filling the air. It reared back, convulsing in spasms, but the surge shorted the panel behind Thorn too, sending a jolt up his arm that numbed his fingers, pain shooting to his elbow. Zorath seized the moment, crawling forward on damaged limbs to retrieve his lance, determination overriding agony. With a guttural roar that echoed like grinding stones, he plunged it into the Reaper's core, the energy blade piercing deep. The beast thrashed once in final defiance, then stilled, smoke curling from the wound like a dying breath. Silence fell over the corridor, broken only by the ship's groans and their labored breaths, the air heavy with the aftermath. Thorn slumped beside his ally, shaking out his hand to restore feeling, pins and needles prickling. "That worked, barely. Next time, let's not cut it so close." Thorn's voice was rough, laced with wry humor. Zorath pushed himself up slowly, fluid leaking from new gashes that marred his side, but he retrieved a sealant patch from his harness, slapping it over the worst of his wounds with practiced efficiency, the material hardening instantly. But his movements were slower now, the cumulative fight ebbing his strength, each motion a labor. Thorn scanned the corridor ahead, rifle ready. The bridge doors loomed at the end, sealed but scarred from prior assaults, dents and burns marking desperate defenses. Alarms wailed faintly in the distance, hull breaches widening, the fleet's formation fracturing under pressure. One more push. We seal those bastards in or out depending on what's waiting beyond. Thorn's words were a vow, resolve stealing his frame. Zorath nodded, gripping Thorn's offered hand to stand. The contact a bridge of trust. Their eyes met briefly, a shared resolve cutting through the exhaustion like a blade, no words needed. The bond of survivors spoke louder than any declaration. They advanced, weapons at the ready. The threshold to the heart of the ship mere steps away, every sense alert. But as the doors hissed partially open under emergency protocols, a new shadow stirred within. Not a Reaper's grotesque form, but something worse, a betrayal in familiar chitin. A Zafari trader, armored and armed with stolen human tech, turned toward them with cold intent. Plasma rifle raised. The betrayal hit like a gut punch, shattering the fragile unity. Zorath froze in place, his lance trembling in his grip for the first time. Kaleth, why? We stood as kin in the collective. The figure, Kaleth, raised his plasma rifle higher, his voice distorted by a jammed translator, garbled harmonics twisting into menace. For the greater harmony. Your alliance with these soft skins ends here. It poisons our essence. Thorn reacted first, diving behind a console as bolts scorched the air, melting deck plating in sizzling furrows. Zorath bellowed in rage, charging despite his wounds. The corridor erupting into fresh chaos, the bridge beckoning like a promise of graves for the unwary. Thorn's boot skidded on the grated floor as he rolled behind the console, the acrid tang of ozone filling his nostrils from the plasma bolt that had just vaporized the panel inches from his head, the heat lingering like a brand. His pulse thrummed in his ears, drowning out the hum of failing life support for a split second, sharpening his world to survival. Kaleth's silhouette loomed in the half-open doors, his armored form backlit by the flickering emergency lights of the bridge beyond, rifle sweeping methodically like a predator scenting blood in the air. Zorath's roar cut through the chaos, raw and unyielding, as he lunged forward with his lance extended, the blade humming with renewed energy. The alien scales rippled with strain, wounds from earlier skirmishes seeping dark ichor that dotted the deck in viscous pools. "Traitor!" he snarled, the word twisting through his translator into a guttural hiss that echoed off the walls. But Kaleth was faster, pivoting with mechanical precision enhanced by forbidden augmentations, his shot grazing Zorath's shoulder and sending the lance clattering against the bulkhead with a metallic ring. Kira, crouched beside Thorn, gripped her makeshift stun baton, cobbled from a severed power conduit and insulation tape in the frantic moments before, her breath coming in sharp bursts, controlled but edged with fury. "We can't take him head on. He's too fortified," she whispered urgently, eyes darting to the corridor's narrowing confines, assessing angles and weaknesses. The ship groaned around them, a distant rumble signaling another structural failure in the hull. But here, survival narrowed to this lethal dance, every move a calculation. Thorn nodded, his mind racing through the debris scattered like battlefield refuse. Shattered conduits sparking intermittently, relays flickering with residual power, the half-open doors that could crush if the power fluctuated again under the strain. Kaleth advanced step by deliberate step, his voice modulator crackling with static interference. "The humans weaken us, Zorath. Their chaos spreads like a virus through the collective. Join me, or die with them in this folly." Another bolt lanced out, melting a support strut that buckled with a screech, forcing Zorath to dive aside into cover, the air shimmering with heat. The Zyfari warrior scrambled up, snatching his lance from the deck. But the betrayal hung in the air like smoke. Kaleth, once a comrade in the Alliance efforts, now a splinter in their fragile unity, driven by purest zeal that saw humanity as the root of corruption. Thorn seized the moment of distraction, yanking a loose panel free from the wall and hurling it like a shield. It absorbed the next shot with a burst of sparks that briefly blinded Kaleth, the traitor recoiling as systems overloaded in a flash. "Kira, the vents!" Thorn barked, pointing to the grill overhead, his voice barely audible over the whine of incoming fire and the ship's protests. She didn't hesitate, jamming her baton into the seam and prying it open with a grunt of effort, her cautious nature yielding to the raw need to act, muscles straining against the unyielding metal. Zorath pressed the attack from his position, feinting left before thrusting low, his lance tip scoring a shallow gash across Calith's leg plating, the armor hissing as it sealed. The traitor staggered, cursing in their native tongue, a cascade of clicks like shattering crystal, but retaliated with a sweeping arc of his rifle that clipped Zorath's arm, drawing a hiss of pain that echoed. Blood, human red and Zyphari blue, mingled on the floor in a grim testament to their shared peril, the deck slick and treacherous. As Kira hauled herself into the vent with agile determination, Thorn covered her descent, firing his sidearm in controlled bursts that forced Calith to duck behind debris, buying seconds. Human ingenuity sparked in the crisis. He grabbed a dangling cable from the damaged console, its end frayed and live with residual power, humming with potential. "Zorath, draw him in, pull his focus." The alien complied without question, bellowing a challenge that echoed off the walls, a warrior's taunt pulling Calith's gaze. The traitor stepped forward, rifle raised high, oblivious to the trap coiling in the shadows. Thorn whipped the cable forward, its electrified tip latching onto Calith's armor with a crackle of energy. Blue arcs dancing across the plating in wild fury. Calith dropped to one knee, rifle clattering away across the deck, his eyes widening behind the visor in a mix of shock and unbridled fury, limbs seizing in involuntary spasms. But the victory was fleeting, a breath in the storm. The doors, sensing the power surge from the discharge, began to Irish shut with a hydraulic whine, threatening to seal them all inside with the wounded betrayer, crushing metal on flesh. Zorath kicked the rifle aside with a sweep of his limb, lance poised at Calith's throat, the tip hovering like judgment. "Why now? The Reapers are at our gates, tearing at the fleet. Your kin die while you play at purity." Zorath's voice was a fractured harmonic, anger and sorrow intertwined. Calith spasmed on the deck, voice garbled through the distortion. "Harmony demands purity, humans. Corrupt the weave." Kira's voice echoed from the vent above, urgent and clear. "Bridge access is clear from here. Move before it seals us out." Thorn hauled Zorath back as the doors ground closer, the air thickening with the scent of burnt circuits and ionized air. They squeezed through the narrowing gap just as it sealed with a final thud, leaving Calith convulsing on the other side, alive but neutralized for now. His threat contained, but the wound to trust festering. The bridge sprawled before them, consoles dark and flickering with residual data streams, the heart of the ship pulsing weakly under assault. But alarms blared anew, red lights strobing across the vast space. The Reaper breach had widened, and something massive stirred in the void beyond the viewports, a shadow against the stars. Their alliance held, battered but unbroken, yet the cost mounted with every step, every scar. Thorn's boot slammed against the bridge console, sparks flying as he rerouted power with a jury-rigged tool from his belt, the multi-tool whining in protest. "Kira, seal those vents, now, before more crawl through." His voice cut through the wailing alarms, steady despite the sweat beading on his brow and trickling into his eyes. Kira dropped from the overhead duct, landing in a crouch that sent a ripple through the flickering holograms projecting tactical overlays. Her fingers danced over a secondary panel, pulling up the environmental controls with swift efficiency, seals engaging with mechanical clicks. On it. But the Reapers are burrowing deeper into the hull, integrity's at 30%, dropping fast. She glanced at Zorath, the alien's iridescent skin pulsing with erratic lights, a sign of his mounting strain from wounds and exertion. "You holding up? We can't lose you here." Kira's concern was genuine, bridging the species gap in quiet solidarity. Zorath nodded, his elongated limbs coiling around a stabilizer strut for support, anchoring himself against the tremors. The corruption spreads like roots in soil, insidious and deep. "I can feel it," probing our minds, whispering doubts. His voice, a harmonic whisper through the translator implant, carried an undercurrent of resolve tempered by weariness. He'd been the first to warn them of the Reapers' psychic tendrils back when their uneasy alliance formed in the debris of the first skirmish, a fragile pact against common foes. Now with Calith lost to whatever madness gripped the purists, Zorath's caution bordered on paranoia, but it kept them alive, his senses a vigilant shield. The viewport shuddered violently, revealing the void's horror. A Reaper tendril, thick as a shuttle and veined with pulsing black ichor, coiled against the glass like a serpent seeking entry, its surface etched with symbols that burned into Thorn's vision like acid, fleeting hallucinations of assimilation. He shook his head sharply, focusing on the main console, hand steady on the controls. Human grit. That's what got them this far. Patching leaks with scavenged plating, turning enemy tech against itself in clever reversals. But the ship's core was failing, its rhythms erratic, and without it, no jump to safety through the hyperlanes. "Thorn, the auxiliary drive's offline," Kira reported, her voice tight as she wrestled with the seals, forcing them closed against probing intrusions. A hiss escaped from above, steam or worse venting into the air, carrying the foul reek of biomechanical decay. "If we don't stabilize the core soon, we're sitting ducks. Easy prey for the swarm." The words hung heavy, a verdict on their odds. He wiped grime from his face with a sleeve, eyes narrowing in concentration. "Zorath, your species' neural link. Can you interface directly with the systems? Override the corruption at its root?" The alien hesitated, his facets dimming as he weighed the risk, bioluminescence flickering uncertainly. "It risks assimilation, the tendrils latching onto my mind. But yes, it can be done." He extended a tendril from his arm, interfacing with the console in a flash of bioluminescent code that danced across the screens, alien algorithms merging with human code. The bridge lights flickered wildly in response, shadows leaping as the Reaper's tendril slammed against the viewport with a thunderous crack that vibrated through the deck. Shards of reinforced plasteel rained down like brittle rain, one grazing Kira's shoulder and drawing a thin line of blood that welled warm. She bit back a curse, slamming a bulkhead control to isolate the breach. Emergency fields shimmering into place. "It's adapting, learning our defenses, countering every patch we throw." Tension coiled in Thorn's gut like a spring as Zorath's body jerked, light strobing chaotically across his form, the interface a battle of wills. The alien's mind was a fortress of layered harmonics, resilient and complex. But the Reapers preyed on disunity, amplifying doubts and fractures like echoes in a canyon. Thorn remembered the early days of first contact. Aliens seeking common ground amid the stars, only to unearth graves of forgotten wars, cycles of violence repeating. Now it was their graves at stake, the bridge a final stand. Zorath's tendril withdrew with a sharp snap, his voice fracturing mid-sentence. "I see it now. The Reapers aren't merely invading. They're rewriting the ship into one of them, code by code, cell by cell. We must sever the neural net completely." Kira's eyes widened in alarm, the implications sinking in. That means purging non-essential systems, life support, navigation, everything non-critical. "We'll be blind and choking in minutes." Thorn gripped the console edge, knuckles white against the plasteel, resolve unyielding. "Do it. We'll improvise the rest. Humans have jury-rigged starships from scrap in worse voids than this." His mind raced ahead. Manual overrides for thrust. Perhaps even a suicide run to the core chamber if needed. Desperation breeding innovation. But as Zorath initiated the purge, the alarm spiked to a deafening pitch, overwhelming the air. The Reaper tendril pierced the viewport fully at last, a gaping maw of darkness unfurling into the bridge, ichor spraying in corrosive arcs that ate through the deck with hungry sizzles. Kira dove aside, rolling clear, while Thorn hauled Zorath back as the bridge buckled under the assault, consoles sparking and dying. "Evacuate to the core chamber, move," Thorn barked, grabbing a plasma cutter from the toolkit scattered on the floor. The cut sizzled through a service hatch, the blade chewing metal in a shower of molten droplets, revealing a narrow corridor alive with emergency strobes flashing like lightning. They scrambled through the opening, the ship groaning like a dying beast in its death throes. Kira sealed the hatch behind them with a desperate slam, her breath ragged and uneven. "We lost the bridge. Navigation's blind now, no charts or vectors." Zorath slumped against the wall for a moment, his light steadying as the purge took hold, purging the corruption. "But the core remains intact. Our path is clear, for now while the purge ripples." Thorn nodded, the cutter still humming in his hand, its glow casting long shadows. The cost was mounting. Calith's betrayal, the bridge lost, pieces of themselves left behind in the wreckage. Yet in the dim corridor light, their shadows merged on the walls, a testament to fragile unity forged in fire. Deeper they pressed into the ship's bowels, the Reaper's whisper echoing faintly in the vents. Purity, or oblivion, a siren call to surrender. Thorn's boots echoed against the grated floor as he led the way down the flickering corridor, the plasma cutter's glow casting jagged shadows on the bulkheads, turning every turn into a potential ambush. Kira followed close behind, her fingers tracing the emergency panel for any sign of auxiliary power reroutes, while Zorath brought up the rear, his multifaceted eyes scanning the vents above with predatory vigilance. Every chitter a warning. The Reaper's whisper had grown louder, a low hum vibrating through the hull like the ship's final breath, insidious and probing. "Quiet!" Thorn hissed, halting them with a raised fist, the gesture universal. Ahead, the corridor split into a maintenance junction, its access tubes pulsing with faint red light. Life support reroutes flickering, or perhaps the first signs of something worse infiltrating the lines. He knelt slowly, peering through the grate with caution, the metal cold under his gloves. Below, a cluster of biomechanical tendrils writhed in the underdeck, probing like roots seeking fertile soil, their surfaces glistening with ichor that dripped corrosively. Kira crouched beside him, her voice a tight whisper that barely carried. "Those are harvesters, advanced scouts. If they breach the core, we're done. No more running. It's assimilation or death." Zorath's exoskeleton clicked softly as he adjusted his grip on the salvage pulse rifle, the weapon an awkward fit in his limbs but lethal all the same. "The Reapers adapt to every counter. We must sever their link before they sense us fully. Cut the roots before they spread." Thorn nodded, his mind racing through options like a tactical sim. The plan was simple on paper. Cut through the junction, reroute power to seal the lower decks, and buy time to reach the auxiliary bridge for a final stand. But nothing stayed simple on this dying vessel. Where every system turned traitor, he fired up the cutter, the blue arc slicing into the grate with a hiss that cut the silence. Sparks flew upward, illuminating the tendrils below. They twitched in response, sensing the disturbance like living sensors. "Move!" Kira shoved him aside as a tendril lashed upward, punching through the grate inches from his leg, the barbs whistling past. It coiled like a serpent, tipped with barbs that dripped viscous fluid eating into the metal with acidic hunger. Thorn rolled clear, swinging the cutter in a wide arc that severed the tendril with a spray of acrid ichor, the stump writhing on the floor and smoking. But more erupted from the deck, coiling toward them in a writhing mass, the junction alive with threat. Zorath opened fire, the pulse rifle's bursts lighting the junction in staccato flashes of blue energy. One tendril exploded in a burst of fluid that sizzled on contact. Another wrapped around his leg, pulling him toward the hole with inexorable force. He braced against the wall, claws digging into the bulkhead with a screech of metal. "Kira, the conduit. Overload it." She lunged forward, yanking a loose panel free and jamming it into the massive tendrils like a wedge, exposed wires sparking wildly. Electricity arced from the lines, frying the growths in a shower of sparks and the stench of burning organics, the pull on Zorath easing as the tendrils recoiled. Thorn grabbed his arm, hauling him back with a grunt of effort. "We can't fight the whole nest here, it's endless. Change of plan. Blow the junction instead. Collapse it on them." Zorath shook free, his lights flickering with pain but resolve unbroken. "The overload will flood the vents with plasma. We lose the direct path to the core, detours through the unknown. Better than losing everything to the swarm." Thorn rummaged in his pack, pulling out a makeshift charge assembled from scavenged cells and wiring, a crude but potent device. Kira covered them, her sidearm barking shots that kept the remaining tendrils at bay. Each blast a temporary reprieve. They worked fast, wiring the charge to the power node amid the chaos, hands steady despite the encroaching threat. The hum intensified around them, the Reaper's voice now a chorus in the walls. Assimilate. Purify. The words slithering into their minds like oil. "Set," Thorn said finally, thumbing the detonator with finality. They bolted back down the corridor as the junction erupted behind them, a muffled boom shaking the ship to its foundations, vibrations rattling loose panels. Alarms wailed anew, the red lights dimming to emergency blue as systems rerouted. Kira glanced back, her face streaked with sweat and grime. That'll slow them down, but the core's integrity just dropped another level. "We're racing the collapse now. Every second counts." Zorath limped forward, his gait uneven but determined, wounds sealed but vitality waning. "Unity demands sacrifice. I will endure, as will we all." The corridor ahead narrowed, forcing them into single file through a service duct, the walls pressing close like a coffin. Thorn squeezed in first, the confines tight, air growing thick with coolant mist that beaded on his visor. Every scrape of their movement echoed unnaturally, a reminder that the Reapers listened, their senses attuned to vibration. Halfway through, the duct shuddered violently, a seam splitting above Kira and venting pressurized gas that burned her skin like acid, the fumes stinging. She bit back a cry, shielding her eyes with one arm while clutching her weapon with the other. "Keep moving!" Thorn called from ahead, his voice muffled, but the gas thickened, blurring their vision into a hazy nightmare. Zorath coughed behind her, his filters straining against the toxin, mandibles clenching. Kira pressed on, one hand on the wall for guidance, the other clutching her weapon like a talisman, the burn spreading under her suit like fire, but she focused on the rhythm of their breaths. Thorn's steady pulls ahead, Zorath's labored rasps behind. They emerged into a wider bay at last, gasping for clean air, the door sealing behind them with a final hiss that cut off the venting. The auxiliary core loomed before them, a throbbing chamber of conduits and glowing panels, its heart pulsing erratically under strain. But the Reapers had been there first. Scars of ichor marred the controls like festering wounds, and a single tendril, thicker than the others, snaked from the base, anchoring deep into the systems. Thorn approached cautiously, cutter ready in his grip, the hum a low threat. "We cut it free, stabilize the flow, careful now. One wrong move and she vents us all into the black." His warning was grave, the chamber a powder keg. Kira nodded, ignoring the blisters rising on her arm from the gas, pain a distant throb. She interfaced her gauntlet with the panel, fingers flying over diagnostics in a blur. "Power's unstable, fluctuating wildly. We need a bypass, reroute through the secondary grid to isolate." Zorath positioned himself at the entrance, rifle trained on the shadows creeping at the edges. "They come." I hear the convergence, a tide rising. As if summoned by his words, the bulkhead groaned and smaller tendrils probed from cracks in the walls, testing the air like questing fingers. Thorn dove in, plasma blade singing as he severed the anchor tendril's base, the cut clean but resisted, the thing recoiling with a spray of fluid that sizzled on the floor. The core's pulse quickened in response, alarms blaring in protest. Kira's bypass held for a precious moment. Light stabilized, the chamber humming steadily once more, a brief respite. Then a surge hit, feedback arcing through her gauntlet like lightning. She jerked back, smoke rising from the port, the shock numbing her arm. "Damn it, it's fighting back, adapting to the reroute." She slammed a manual override, sparks flying as she forced compliance. Thorn finished the cut, the tendril collapsing in a twitching heap, but the victory was short-lived. The chamber trembled anew, a deep crack spiderwebbing across the floor, the Reaper nexus feeding relentless, the station folding under the assault. Thorn gripped the railing as the deck bucked beneath him, the crack in the floor widening like a hungry maw, shards of plasteel raining down into the abyss below where the Reaper's hive pulsed with stolen life, a grotesque heartbeat. Kira yanked her gauntlet free, fingers blackened but steady despite the pain, and slapped a sealant patch over the sparking port, the material bubbling as it adhered. "Core's destabilizing, it's pulling the whole station into the void, shearing the anchors." Her voice rose over the din, urgency sharpening every word. He spun on his heel, firing a burst into the writhing mass emerging from the fissure. Bulky forms clambering up like nightmares given form, their carapaces glistening with the same acidic fluid that had eaten through bulkheads earlier. One latched onto a console, mandibles clicking as it interfaced directly, rerouting power straight to the Reaper's core with mechanical efficiency. Thorn's shots pinged off its hide, barely slowing the advance, the armor adapting in real time. "Raj, cover the flanks, keep them off our sides." Thorn barked into his comm, voice cutting through the static like a knife. From the corridor behind, Raj's heavy repeater thrummed to life, mowing down a swarm of smaller drones that skittered from the vents like metallic insects, their forms darting erratically. The engineer, wiry and ever cautious, muttered curses under his breath, his free hand welding a barricade in place with a plasma torch that flared bright, sealing paths. "These bastards are adapting faster than we can patch, learning from every hit. One got through the line, it's in the auxiliary lines now siphoning." Raj's warning was laced with frustration, his meticulous nature clashing with the chaos. Kira dashed to the central panel, her limp more pronounced now from the earlier burn, boots scraping against the tilting floor as gravity warped. She punched in overrides with frantic speed, sweat beading on her brow as readouts flickered red, warnings cascading. The station groaned again, a metallic screech echoing from deep within its structure, and the air grew thick with the acrid tang of melting circuits, choking and eye-watering. "If we don't sever the nexus feed completely, this place folds in on itself, implodes." "Thorn, we need that anchor point clear now before it roots deeper." He nodded grimly, holstering his rifle and drawing the plasma blade once more, the hum a comforting growl. The blade's blue edge cast stark shadows on the encroaching horde, turning the chamber into a tableau of light and dark. Leaping over the widening crack with a desperate bound, he plunged into the fray, severing limbs and cables in a whirlwind of strikes, each swing a testament to survival. A reaper lunged from the shadows, its claw grazing his shoulder armor, tearing a gash that sparked against exposed wiring beneath. Pain lanced through him like fire, but he twisted mid-motion, driving the blade into its core with vengeful force. It spasmed in death, collapsing in a spray of ichor that burned like fire on his visor, the acid etching faint lines. Raj's voice crackled over the comm amid the roar. Incoming surge, brace for impact. The floor heaved violently and a section gave way beneath a cluster of drones, swallowing them into the darkness below with screams of twisting metal. Thorn staggered, grabbing a protruding pipe to steady himself, the metal cold and slick. Below, the hive's glow intensified through the fissure, tendrils questing upward like roots seeking light insatiable. Kira's plan had bought them time, a fragile buffer, but the Reapers were learning, their collective mind weaving countermeasures from the human's own tech, turning ingenuity against its creators. "Can't hold the door much longer," Raj shouted from his position, his torch sputtering as another wave battered the barricade, dents forming. A drone breached the line, skittering toward Kira on spindly legs. She stomped it flat with a grunt, her caution yielding to raw survival instinct, the crunch satisfying. Thorn vaulted back across the crack, slashing at the main tendril anchoring the chamber to the hive below. It thrashed in response, wrapping around his leg with crushing force, but he hacked free, blood mixing with the fluid on the deck in a slick mess. The core's pulse faltered for a heartbeat, Kira's override taking hold at last. Light steadied, if only briefly, and the crack's expansion slowed to a crawl, a momentary victory. But the cost mounted relentlessly. Raj's arm hung limp, scorched from a near-miss plasma splash, and Thorn's vision blurred from the gash's sting, focus wavering. The Reapers weren't just fighting, they were consuming, turning the station's bones against its crew, a slow devouring. Kira met Thorn's gaze across the chaos, her eyes fierce and unbowed. "One more push. We collapse the feed lines, starve the bastards out, cut their lifeline." He nodded, rallying what strength remained, the human spirit unquenched. The hive below roared in defiance through the fissure. But for the first time, a fragile silence fell in the chamber, broken only by the hum of failing systems and their ragged breaths. They pressed on, improvised charges in hand, the void yawning wider beyond the walls, a silent witness. Thorn gripped the makeshift charge tighter, its wiring biting into his palm like a live wire, a reminder of the peril in every creation. The corridor ahead twisted under the station's groan, metal panels buckling inward as the Reapers burrowed deeper into the hull, their presence a cancer spreading. Kira moved ahead with silent boots on the grated floor, scanner in one hand humming data and pulse rifle in the other, barrel sweeping shadows. Raj limped behind, supported on her shoulder, his breaths coming in ragged bursts, but his grip on the makeshift plasma cutter was ironclad, determination etched in his pained features. The swarm's hum grew louder behind them, a mechanical frenzy echoing off the bulkheads. Reaper drones closing in, their adaptive algorithms learning from every human dodge and feint, evolving mid-pursuit. "Left at the junction," Thorn whispered, his voice steady despite the fire in his side where the shrapnel had bitten deep earlier, a constant throb. He glanced back, catching Kira's nod. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, mirrored the resolve that had kept them alive through the initial ambush. A shared fire. Raj coughed, spitting blood onto the deck, but managed a grim smile through the pain. Just like old times on Vega Prime. Except those bugs didn't hack the damn life support, made it personal. They burst into the auxiliary control room, a cavern of flickering consoles and tangled cables where the Reapers had nested their core interface, tendrils weaving through panels like parasitic veins. The air hummed with static, thick with the biotic pulse of stolen power, the room a heart of corruption. Thorn slammed the door override, sealing it with a hiss of hydraulics, but the thuds against the metal from outside told him it wouldn't hold long, the swarm battering relentlessly. Kira eased Raj onto a nearby console for support, his face paling further as she tore another strip from her uniform to bind his leg wound tighter, stemming the flow. "Charges first, get them placed before they breach," she said, her tone clipped with no room for argument, efficiency overriding exhaustion. Thorn nodded, pulling the scavenged conduit brace from his pack. their improvised detonator wired with jury-rigged capacitors from the engineering bay earlier, a testament to Desperation's ingenuity. It wasn't pretty, a tangle of exposed wires and salvaged fuel cells pulsing faintly, but human grit had turned scrap into salvation before in the Void's unforgiving trials. He knelt by the central node, the Reaper tendrils twitching as if sensing the threat coiling defensively. "This'll fry their network. Overload and cascade back to the hive," he muttered, splicing the brace into the power grid with careful twists, sparks flying in protest. Sparks harshened the room in blue flashes, and the swarm outside redoubled their assault, the door buckling inward with a groan that vibrated through the deck. Raj, propped against the wall, raised his cutter with his good arm, the beam humming ready. "If it shorts on us, we're cooked alive. You sure about the timing on this hack?" Thorne's hand steadied, fingers dancing over the connections with frontier precision. "Trust the hack, it's our best shot. We overload the aux feed. It cascades back to their hive ship, burns them from within." A low whine built in the conduits, the station shuddering as systems rebelled against the intrusion. Kira joined him at the node, her multi-tool steadying the unstable rig, their movements a silent symphony of adaptation. No protocols or manuals, just raw ingenuity born from Desperation's forge. The door gave way with a final,